Welcome to this deep dive, where we get into some fascinating research in machine learning.
Hey there.
So today, we're tackling a paper that looks at something pretty fundamental, actually.
Yeah.
How do we automatically figure out when scientific findings are presented with, uncertainty?
That's a huge challenge. It's not always spelled out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The paper we've got is Annotating Scientific Uncertainty, a comprehensive model using linguistic patterns and comparison with existing approaches. And right off the bat, what stands out is this new system they introduce called Unscientify.
And Unscientify is designed specifically to detect that uncertainty in the full text of scientific papers.
What's really interesting to me is the way it does it.
Right. It's not just throwing a massive LLM at the problem.
No, it's more targeted. It combines pattern matching in sentences, looks at complex grammar, and even checks who the authors are attributing the uncertainty to. Is it their own work or something they cited?
It's a very deliberate kind of step-by-step approach, trying to capture the nuances.
And here's the real head turner, I think. They tested Unscientify against some of the big players, the large language models we hear so much about.
Yeah, the BERT variants, GPT-4, Llama 2.
And the result, Unscientify, using these, let's say, more traditional NLP techniques, actually did better.
Outperform them, yeah. In this specific task of identifying scientific uncertainty, got an accuracy of, what was it, 0.808?
Around 81%, yeah. Which really makes you think, doesn't it?
Right.
About the best tools for certain jobs in AI.
Absolutely. And if we think about why this matters, for machine learning applications, being able to precisely spot uncertainty is huge.
How so?
Well, imagine better search engines for research papers. You could filter results not just by topic, but maybe by the confidence level.
Oh, interesting. So find me papers where the authors are pretty sure versus ones that are more speculative.
Exactly. Or text mining tools that could summarize a field, highlighting where there's consensus and where the big questions still are. It could really refine how we process scientific literature.
Okay, so let's dig into the paper itself then. What's the core problem they're really trying to crack?
Well, like you said, uncertainty in science writing is often subtle. It's woven into the language. Previous attempts often just looked for specific words, right? Hedge words.
Like might, suggests, possibly, that kind of thing.
Yeah. But the paper argues, pretty convincingly, I think, that that's just too simple. Uncertainty pops up in many forms.
Like what?
It could be acknowledging study limitations, variability in the data, maybe just a cautious interpretation, even disagreement with older work. Unscientify tries to capture that whole spectrum.
Right, not just a checklist of words. So how did they do it? They developed a more detailed classification.
They did a really fine-grained annotation scheme. They came up with 12 different groups of scientific uncertainty patterns, or SU patterns.
12 groups, wow.
Yeah, based on semantic meaning and, the linguistic features. So you've got things like conditional expressions, if X, then maybe Y. You've got explicit hypotheses, predictions, even expressions of subjectivity or disagreement. It's much richer.
Okay, that sounds way more comprehensive.
And another layer they added, which is quite clever, is trying to figure out who is expressing the uncertainty. Is it the authors of the current paper talking about their own work?
Or are they just reporting uncertainty from a study they cited?
Exactly, because that distinction is pretty important, right? Uncertainty about your own results versus someone else's limitations.
Definitely carries different weight.
Yeah.
So how did they test this Unscientify system? Rigorously, it sounds like.
Oh, yeah. They didn't just compare it to one or two others. They went head-to-head with a whole range of models.
Like the fine-tuned BERT models, Cybert and those.
Yep, those ones adapted for scientific text. Plus, newer methods like few-shot learning TARS, set-fit, and zero-shot learning using the big guns.
GPT-4, Llama 2, Mistral.
All of them. Trying to see how Unscientify stacked up against models that need lots of specific training data versus those that learn more generally.
And as we mentioned up front, the results were, well, surprising to some maybe.
Unscientify came out on top, highest accuracy. Even though some of the LMs did okay, they didn't quite beat this more focused approach for this task.
It's fascinating. Let's maybe take a step back. What's the history here? How do we get to this point in trying to detect uncertainty?
Well, the earliest attempts, going way back, were pretty basic. Like we touched on, they relied on lists of words, handcrafted lexicons.
The dictionary approach. Find these words. Flag uncertainty. People like Murdoñez did early work there, right? On hedging.
Exactly. Good starting point, but, language is tricky.
Context matters. A word isn't always uncertain.
Precisely. So the next step was more sophisticated rule-based methods. People started incorporating grammar, sentence structure.
Systems like context, Chapman and colleagues.
Right. Looking for patterns, not just isolated words. And folks in specific fields like biomedicine or physics at Nasova and others developed rules tailored to their domains.
So getting better, more nuanced, but still rule-based.
So rule-based, which often meant they could be a bit rigid, maybe didn't generalize perfectly to new writing styles or slightly different topics. And building those rules, that takes effort.
A lot of manual work.
Definitely. Then came the machine learning era. A big moment was the ConLL 2010 shared task.
Yes, focused on uncertainty and negation.
Right. People started using statistical models, training them on labeled examples to learn the patterns. And weakly supervised methods like bootstrapping from Medlock and Briscoe tried to get around needing tons of hand-labeled data.
So letting the machine do more of the pattern finding.
Yeah, a big step forward. But challenges persisted. Figuring out the really subtle cues was still hard. And domain adaptation was a problem. A model trained on medical texts might not work well on physics papers.
And that brings us more or less up to date with deep learning.
Pretty much. The arrival of transformer models, BERT, XLNet, Roberta, that was seen as a potential game changer. Their ability to grasp context seemed perfect for this.
People like Kandawal and Brito used them for speculation detection.
Showed promising results. But, and this is kind of the argument in the Unscientify paper, even these powerful models can be limited by their training data, maybe not capturing the full range of how scientists express doubt.
So the ambiguity of language, different writing styles, figuring out the source of uncertainty, those core challenges, didn't just vanish with LLMs.
Exactly. Bongelli and others talked about focusing on the here and now uncertainty of the current study, which is still hard to isolate.
Okay, so with that context, let's get into the nuts and bolts of Unscientify itself. You mentioned 4 main components.
Yeah, 4 main steps. First is text preprocessing, basic cleanup, but also important things like standardizing citation formats.
So it knows when it's seeing a reference.
Right. And co-reference resolution, using Spacey, figuring out what pronouns like it or they refer back to, crucial for tracking who said what.
Got it. Step 1, clean and prep the text. What's next?
Step 2 is the core, pattern matching. This uses that custom list of 89 linguistic patterns grouped into those 12 uncertainty categories we talked about.
And they built their own matcher using Spacey for this.
Yep. Looking for specific phrases like it is possible that might suggest, or grammatical structures like if, then, sentences. If a sentence doesn't match any of these uncertainty patterns, the default assumption is it's a factual statement, a claim.
Okay, so pattern matching finds potential uncertainty. Then step 3.
Complex sentence checking. This is clever. It looks within a sentence to see if other parts might cancel out the uncertainty.
How so? Give me an example.
Like a sentence might start with, it might seem that X, but then follow up with, however strong evidence shows Y. The system checks for these kinds of rebuttals or confirmations that might negate the initial hedge.
Okay, so it could reclassify a sentence back to claim if the uncertainty is effectively withdrawn within the same sentence.
Exactly. And finally, step 4 is authorial reference checking. This is where it tries to pin down the source.
Current authors versus cited work again.
Precisely. Using Spacey's matcher, the uncertainty lexicon, and also named entity recognition, spotting author names and things like that to figure out who's expressing the doubt. So the final label might be uncertainty from the authors, from prior work, or maybe both.
That's quite a detailed pipeline. And they made a demo available too, right?
They did, so people can try it out.
Good stuff. Okay, let's circle back to that performance comparison. Unscientify versus the LLMs.
Right. So Roberta was the best of the fine-tuned bunch, just under 80% accuracy, pretty good.
And SetFit, the few-shot method,
Also showed promise, around 77%. And GPT-4, even with zero-shot learning, just giving it instructions, hit nearly 74% accuracy when prompted carefully. Respectable.
but Unscientify edged them all out, just over 80%. And you mentioned it was good at specific things.
Yeah. The paper notes high precision for claim labels, meaning when it said something was a fact, it was usually right. And high recall for uncertainty, meaning it was good at finding most of the uncertain statements.
And statistically significant, too.
Yes, they ran the tests, Friedman, Wilcoxon ranked some, and found Unscientify's performance was significantly better than most of the others.
What about when things went wrong? The error analysis must be interesting.
It really is. They pointed out the black box issue with some generative LLMs like GPT-4. Sometimes it would label the exact same sentence differently on different runs.
Inconsistency. That's not ideal for reliable analysis.
Not really. It raises questions about interpretability and, well, reliability. Unscientify, on the other hand, was consistent. Its errors were different.
How so?
It tended to miss less common or more implicit ways of expressing uncertainty. They gave examples like, the study needs to be replicated, which implies uncertainty, but might not fit a direct pattern. Or, nonetheless, only a subset, suggesting limitations.
So it missed some subtle cases.
Yeah.
But the upside is?
The upside is transparency and maintainability. You see an error like that, you can potentially add a new pattern or refine an existing one in Unscientify's rule base. Much harder to tweak a giant LLM in the same way.
That makes sense. So what are the broader takeaways here for machine learning?
I think the big one is that rule-based pattern matching approaches may be combined with some linguistic analysis. They're still incredibly relevant, even with amazing LLMs around.
Especially for specific nuanced tasks in specialized domains.
Exactly. Things like resource efficiency matter too. Unscientify is likely much less computationally expensive than running massive models. And interpretability, knowing why it made a decision, is a huge plus in scientific contexts.
So it has real potential for improving tools we use, like information retrieval, text mining.
Definitely. Better filtering of uncertain findings, more nuanced analysis of scientific arguments. And the data set they released, Aurora Mess, that's a valuable contribution in itself for future research.
Okay, this feels like a good point to shift gears slightly. What kind of new ideas does this work spark? Let's jump into our novel notions segment.
All right, so building on this, one thought comes from their observation about word embeddings maybe diluting the uncertainty signal.
Right, the standard embeddings trained on general text.
What if you used Unscientify's output, the specific text spans it identifies as uncertain, to train more specialized embeddings?
Like uncertainty-aware embeddings. Focusing the training on just those linguistic contexts where doubt is expressed.
Exactly. Instead of generic training data, you use the bits Unscientify flags. The hypothesis would be that these embeddings might become much better at capturing those subtle distinctions.
And the potential payoff.
Well, think about downstream tasks, like meta-analysis. If you could more accurately gauge the uncertainty expressed in each study using these embeddings, you might weight them more effectively, leading to perhaps more robust overall conclusions when combining studies.
That's a really neat idea, using the interpretability of one system to improve the representation learned by another.
Here's another angle, building more directly on Unscientify's categories.
Yep.
The system already uses those 12 SU pattern groups. What if we push that further? Could we train a system to automatically classify the source or reason for the uncertainty?
Going beyond just uncertainty present to uncertainty due to methodology, or uncertainty due to data limits, or conflating prior work, using those 12 groups as labels.
Precisely. You'd get a much more structured understanding of why the uncertainty exists, not just that it exists.
Wow. Imagine applying that across a whole field of research.
You could potentially generate summaries of the main limitations, the open questions, the theoretical gaps, just by analyzing the literature's uncertainty signals.
That could seriously speed up identifying where the next research effort should focus. Maybe even help predict where breakthroughs are needed or likely.
It's like automated science mapping, focusing on the frontiers of doubt and inquiry. Now, obviously, these are speculative ideas.
For entertainment purposes only.
Right. But Unscientify provides a really interesting starting point for thinking about these kinds of next-generation analysis tools in machine learning.
Totally agree. So, wrapping up, the key takeaway from this deep dive seems clear. Unscientify really shows the persistent value of focused, interpretable methods for specific NLP challenges.
Even in the age of LLMs, yeah, there's still a strong place for these kinds of tailored approaches.
For those of you listening, especially in the machine learning community who want to get into the nitty-gritty, the link to the actual paper is available.
Definitely worth a read if this topic interests you.
And maybe we'll leave you with a final thought to ponder. As AI evolves, what's the right balance? How do we best combine the incredible breadth of large models with the surgical precision of domain-specific interpretable tools, especially when trying to understand something as complex as scientific research?
It's a key question for the future of the field, I think. How to get the best of both worlds.
Indeed. Thanks for exploring this research with us today.
Thanks, everyone.